Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host. Today is July 7th. Now, normally that wouldn't be noteworthy, but it's noteworthy because I was supposed to be home today. And it's actually the second time in a row that I haven't gotten home on time. And it's kind of getting old. So there's this guy with an Amazon trailer that's trying to blindside in next to me. Fortunately, there are two parking spots. You can see there's a gap here between me and the other truck. But I may have to, stop what I'm doing. Anyway, because actually there's a spot across the way he could not blindside back into, but I guess maybe he thought the two parking spots was a better idea. Holy crap, I think he's getting out to look. Anyway, so I'm just kind of, first of all, there's this shortage of loads, but it's like when you tell somebody you want to be home, that should just happen somehow. So anyway, I'm a little bit salty about that. Other stuff, though, on this date, on this day in 1928 in Chillicothe, Missouri, was the first day that sliced bread was sold. So yeah, it's not been around. Sliced bread, at least in the United States, has not been around even an entire century. So there you go. And it was sliced not by a knife, but like a bread slicer that this gentleman invented, and I can't remember his name. But so also on this date, but we're not sure what year exactly. Well, we think it was 1906, but we're not really sure. Satchel Paige was born. If you don't know who Satchel Paige was, he's a guy that played, he was a pitcher in the Negro Leagues, and then, he's legendary, right? But the thing is, nobody really knew exactly how old this guy was. And it's very possible that he was pitching, at a very high level, into his 50s, right? Like he was just this ageless dude. But they think he was born this day in 1906 in Mobile, Alabama, which, by the way, is the hometown of Henry Aaron, if anybody's keeping score at home. So anyway, other stuff this day, Michelle Kwan was born on this day, Olympic figure skater. She's old. She was born in 1980. Also on this day in 1933, every once in a while people say, oh, what books do you read? Stuff like that. If I could recommend one American author, if you're interested in the history of this country across several different genres, not just war, not just people, biography, David McCullough, born on this day in 1933. If the only thing you ever did was buy David McCullough's books, you would have a huge body of knowledge about American history across all, he wrote the book Adams, which was I mentioned this before, but it was made into the mini-series or HBO series. He wrote a book about Truman. That was tour de force. He wrote the book 1776, which talks about just that year in U.S. history. He wrote a book about the building of the Brooklyn Bridge. He wrote a book about, and I can't remember it, but I've read it and it's on my bookshelf. I can't remember the title, but it's about American expatriates that went to Paris during the 19th century. But that included people that you wouldn't necessarily, and these were artists, authors, but as an example, James Fenimore Cooper, who wrote the Leatherstocking Tales and Last of the Mohicans and stuff, he lived in Paris. Samuel F.B. Morse was an artist, but later invented Morse code. He lived in Paris. He really wanted to be an artist way more than he wanted to be famous for inventing Morse code. Another person that lived there was Charles Sumner. Now, he was a senator from Massachusetts when he was savagely beaten on the floor of the U.S. Senate by a guy named, well, his last name was Brooks. I'm trying to think. Preston Brooks. Preston Brooks, and this is in the antebellum era, before the Civil War, right? Preston Brooks was a rabid, racist, pro-slavery, segregationist, whatever you want to call him, slave owner, congressman from South Carolina. Sumner was an abolitionist, and the beating, and it wasn't with fists, it was with a cane, a walking stick, and it was also totally unprovoked. I mean, Brooks took exception to Sumner's language on the floor of the Senate. But the beating nearly killed Sumner, and he went, in part, after he recovered somewhat, he went to Paris. But David McCullough outlines all of these people and a bunch of other famous people that were artists, like John Singer Sargent. And, you know, it's just a very incredible book, but talks about Americans in Paris. Go read any of his books, and you will thank me later, because they're all incredible. They're all excellent. I haven't read them all, but every one I've read, I thoroughly enjoyed. So David McCullough, I don't know, that's about it for today, July 7th. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the trucking industry, right? And, you know, I came across a piece that featured some quotes from an MIT, I think he's a data scientist, but he certainly is he's a scientific researcher. And this man's name is David Carell. And I'm giving him a shout out for a couple reasons. One is I emailed the guy with some thoughts, and I told him I had a YouTube channel, and I'd give him a shout out. But the other reason I want to give this guy a shout out is because I feel like a lot of times the trucking industry doesn't have good allies, for lack of a better term. We don't have people that are outside our industry, but who have a fairly good understanding of the day-to-day problems that we face. But Mr. Carell has done research, and based on his quotes, you know, he talked to a lot of truck drivers. And one of the things that he disputes is that there's this shortage of truckers. And his research, from basically looking at truckers' logs and talking to truckers, his research has disclosed, and by the way, he did present to Congress, and I guess even President Biden talked about some of this research. But what he discovered was that most of us, and this is something we know, but it's hard to get that information in front of policymakers, in front of decision makers sometimes, you know? And sorry for the glare. I'll do that, but it's not working. You know, the funny thing is the sun is completely down. Anyway, so his research shows that, and I'd have to look at the numbers again, but it was a surprisingly low percentage of both on-duty and drive time that truckers across the board utilize on a daily basis. And what he said was, and I agree with this, the problem in trucking is not that there's a shortage of drivers. It's that the drivers that there are underutilized. In other words, we're not driving, or even sometimes loading and unloading, you know, as much as we want to be. And I'll give you a perfect example of how that works. Just today, I picked up a load in Cincinnati. This load was supposed to be a drop and hook. I get there, well, first I called and asked if it was ready. And I won't say the name of this company, but they originated in a town in southeastern Virginia. So I get this guy answers the phone, and I'm like, hey, I was calling to check and see if this load's ready, because it's a drop and hook available between noon and 1800. He's like, no, it's not ready. If you want to bring me a clean, fully fueled trailer, I'll see what I can do. I'll see what I can do, right? And then I get there, so then I'm like, what the F, I say something to my fleet manager, who was really no help. And, because the guy said, oh, we don't have any, trailers. So I go there, and the guy at the gate, who works for a subcontractor, not actually that company, he says, yeah, we're 7 trailers short. That's why everybody's getting live unloaded. So I'm like, okay. And, I was like, did anybody contact Prime? And he's like, yeah, they sent him emails. I'm not sure how he would know that, because he's like a security dude from a different company, but whatever. So then I pull in, I get backed into a door, and then I start looking around, and I'm like, there's like 5 Prime trailers sitting across from me, none of which are running, so I know they're not loaded. And I'm like, how is it that you guys are 7 trailers short? There's 5 trailers sitting here. And in fact, a guy came when I was there and dropped one off and left bobtail. I don't know, but somebody's lying. Somebody's full of crap. But that's just an example of what Mr. Corral has found, right? So I was there for like 3 hours when it should have been a drop and hook. And oh, by the way, this is kind of an aside to that, is I didn't get home on time, right? But and I dropped yesterday, so I was in the sleeper berth for not really in the sleeper berth, but when I finally went on duty, I'd been in the sleeper berth 20 hours. I don't need a 20-hour break, And the interesting thing is that there were all these like trucking companies, and I'll say some of the names. CRST, US Express were 2 of the main players that were totally advocating for people 18 years of age to be able to get their CDLs. Now, I know for a fact that USX is going to quit doing that, and I'll tell you why. Because Dave Jackson, who's the CEO of Knight Swift, said recently at a conference that he thought 18-year-olds getting CDLs was a horrible idea. And do you know what the reason was? It was not safety. He thought it was a horrible idea because he goes, we already have more capacity than we need right now. Why would you want to add drivers to the mix? And while I agree, I actually do agree with Dave, and I think there are some other compelling reasons not to have 18-year-olds do it. It also shows, because what Mr. Corral talked about in this article was, he's like, yeah, why do you want to add capacity? You don't have a capacity problem. You have a utilization problem, which, by the way, is the same problem that's been vexatious for the railroads, right? The railroads have, they have plenty of locomotives. What they haven't been able to do is utilize locomotives because of crew issues and other issues. Trucking doesn't have a crew issue, and we don't have an asset issue, but we have an issue that the railroads don't have, which is we got to wait around to get loaded and unloaded. And like, for example, I had a trailer that really, it was, I could have cleaned it out, but because I thought I had a drop and hook, I was like, okay, I got to go fill this up with fuel, because it wasn't, I was picking it up at a place where some of the fuel had burned down. So I had to drive, because these were in Cincinnati. The closest fuel I could find was and washout, because I did want to get it cleaned out since I was dropping it at this company from Southeast Virginia. I was like, all right, I'll get it washed out and fueled, and there was a place I could do it both, but it was like 30 miles away, right? It was up 75. So I go do all of that, and then, you know, I probably didn't need to do either of those things, right? And again, it wasted my time. It wasted my fuel too, but it wasted my time. And, you know, I dropped at about 1 o'clock yesterday. I'll say 2, just to be fair. I dropped at about 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon. My pickup was 10 miles away. And yet, you know, I ended up, probably it took another 27 hours to get this load picked up through no fault of mine. And, you know, no weather issues, no real traffic issues, just the vagaries of this business. And, you know, it really is interesting to get when you look at the data. And you take this data and you go to like these trucking companies and go, yeah, what about this, right? Why is it like this? Like, why couldn't my fleet manager or prime sales, I'm in Ohio for crying out loud, right? There's always loads in Ohio going somewhere, you know, especially to the central Atlantic, right? So PA, Delaware, Maryland, you know, Northern Virginia, place I want to be, right? Nothing. Oh, this is the best we got. Well, you know, I'm going to start doing things a little bit different, because every time my fleet manager goes on vacation, I find out about it about 10 minutes before he's leaving. Seriously. So what I'm going to do is, and by the way, Jim C had an interesting video today. He talked about how he just doesn't request time off. He just waits till he's close to his house and then says, yeah, I'm taking time off. And I've tried over the years not to do that, but I can get pretty close to my house. There's several shippers and receivers in my area. And so maybe I think maybe the next time I'm just going to be like, yeah, I'll just get close to the house. Because the last time I wanted to be home and I couldn't get home, I bobtailed from Minooka, Illinois to Pittston. And my wife met me in Pittston because we were going up. That's when I went up to Hudson Valley for a few days. That worked out okay, but you know, it still was a kind of a pain in the butt. And this time I wanted to be home for my daughter's play, and she has 2 performances this weekend. I'm only going to get to see 1, so not happy about that. But anyway, you know, when you hear people saying, well, there's a shortage of drivers, you know, tell them they're wrong. The data proves it. It's not a shortage of drivers. And companies that keep saying that, and you know, the funny thing was, he's like, why do companies want to hire more drivers? So they can have more drivers sitting around. And he pointed out, and this is something I loved, he goes, it's insane to me that people don't get paid by the hour. Like, and that kind of hits the nail on the head, right? Like, if trucking companies had to pay you $40 an hour, and they had to pay you for all the time you sit around, underutilized or not utilized at all, I guarantee that it would change quickly about how you get loads. And, you know, you would be running constantly, because they'd be like, hey, we're not going to pay you for the 10 hours, but you know, it's like if I say, hey, I got 11 hours and I'll run all 11, you know, and pay me for it. But if I'm sitting around a shipper that you told me was a drop-in hook, which would have taken me maybe if things are slow at the facility, maybe a half an hour. I sat there an additional 2.5 hours plus. You got to pay me for that. So I don't expect anything to change anytime soon, but it is nice to know that we have that we got people out there that understand, on a granular level what truckers are experiencing. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. The funny thing is, though, I don't know that the government is the answer. David, Mr. Carell, he pointed out that a better way to do it is for trucking companies, to rank shippers and receivers. And the shippers and receivers that waste more of their drivers' time, they charge those shippers and receivers more. But the predicate to that, I believe, is going to be hourly pay. If companies had to pay what the driving rate is, so let's say a company's paying you 50 cents a mile, right? You can go, let's say, 60 miles in an hour, that's $30. A lot of these companies want to pay you like $12, $14, $15 an hour for detention, right? No, they should pay you what the driving rate is. And so that would be $30 an hour. And I guarantee if they started paying that, they would start charging more. And these shippers and receivers that have zero respect for your time, these receivers that use lumpers that take like 8 hours to load or unload a truck, that crap would stop. Like I had lumpers that took 8 hours to unload me in Virginia not too long ago, and that was only the part of my load. That was a 3-stop load. 8 hours, no joke. So I hope that these trucking companies, that they start going data driven and say, hey, Tyson, we like your business, but you're costing us a fortune. Because Tyson's system is, we don't give a shit how long a trucker has to wait, right? That's why Tyson stands for trucker, you're staying overnight. Like I went to a Tyson facility the other day. It wasn't even open. But yet sales had said, yeah, you can go anytime after midnight. I get there at like 3 o'clock in the morning, 3:30. They're like, yeah, we know nobody's coming in until 6. Why is that? If they were paying me $30 an hour, I guarantee that wouldn't have happened. If Prime was paying me $30 an hour for a detention, that wouldn't have happened. But I think what I'm going to start doing is keeping a log of all the times that sales is wrong. And the other thing, I kind of had this epiphany. I was like, what if there was an app for rating, because like we can go in, and I think it's a Macro 27 maybe, where we can go in and rate shippers and receivers. But I feel like that just falls on deaf ears. I don't know that anybody does anything. And part of the reason I know is because it's character, like you can only put like 100 characters, which is like nothing, right? It's like Twitter used to be. You can't really detail what the problems are. But what if there was an app that truckers could use to rate places, where it would be unvarnished? You could put as many comments as you want. You could have like a radio button menu, and then all of us, especially those of us who can reject loads, we could be like, hey, 17 truckers ranked this place and they got 1 star out of 5. Chances are my experience at this place is going to be kind of negative. So, I think that might be useful. I don't know how I would monetize that, but as soon as I figure out how I can monetize that, I'm gonna talk to some people I know that know how to develop apps, because I just really feel like the more information you have, the better off we all are. So anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.